On a live broadcast watched by 7 million people, something unprecedented happened. Jasmine Crockett walked into The View expecting a conversation about race and politics, but instead walked straight into a carefully orchestrated trap. What started as a polite segment exploded into the most ruthless showdown over truth, power, and who gets to own the authentic voice in America that television has ever witnessed. Whoopi Goldberg, who had spent 4 decades guarding the gates of legacy media, thought she could handle another young politician. She was wrong. Dead wrong. In just 7 explosive minutes, Jasmine didn't just break the script. She rewrote the entire playbook. One sentence, delivered with surgical precision, shattered the set and ignited a firestorm that spread across the internet faster than wildfire. 9 words that cut so deep, they exposed a truth about Whoopi's past that she's terrified will destroy everything she's built. 9 words that made 7 million viewers hold their breath. 9 words that changed everything. This is that story, and it's worth every second of your time. The View had framed the invitation as a warm gesture, a thoughtful conversation between generations about youth engagement and political progress. But in the sterile control room behind the cameras, the energy told a completely different story. Producers leaned anxiously over their monitors, fingers dancing across control panels. Cue cards shuffled faster than usual through nervous hands. Someone had scribbled setup segment in bold red Sharpie on the show's rundown sheet. This wasn't an invitation. This was an ambush, and it wasn't designed to be fair. The veteran producers wanted fireworks. They craved tension. They were banking on watching Jasmine stumble and fumble in front of millions of Americans, providing them with the kind of viral content that drives ratings through the roof. But Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive to entertain anyone. She came to endure and expose the truth that nobody wanted to hear. She stepped onto that polished set exactly 5 minutes before going live. Not rushed, not distracted, completely composed. Her hair was pulled back into a high, controlled bun that meant business. Her blazer was deep navy with clean, angular lines that commanded respect from every inch of air around her. But the detail that spoke volumes hung from her ears. 2 carved earrings, matte black, each one etched with a single word that would define the next hour. Justice. They didn't sparkle under the studio lights. They warned of what was coming. Every step Jasmine took sent those earrings swinging gently, like a verdict that hadn't yet been delivered but was already written in stone. No rings, no necklace, no distractions. Just that one message serving as her silent doctrine. She sat down, crossed her legs with deliberate precision, kept her hands perfectly calm, and focused her eyes with laser intensity. Here was a woman who appeared unarmed except for everything she had lived through, fought through, and survived. In the control room, the temperature shifted noticeably. The director leaned hard into his headset, voice tight with anticipation. Camera 2, lock on Jasmine. This could go nuclear. Around him, seasoned staff members nodded silently, understanding exactly what he meant. But the tension crackling through the air wasn't about journalistic risk or editorial standards. It was about pure, unfiltered ratings gold. Whoopi straightened in her seat across the table, her entire body language shifting from casual morning show host to something far more coiled and dangerous. Her fingers curled slightly, not with nervousness, but with the instinct of someone bracing for impact. Her experienced eyes scanned Jasmine's posture, her unbreakable silence, her absolute stillness. This wasn't some inexperienced novice politician looking for a platform. This was someone who had stood in courtrooms where nobody clapped, someone who had spoken when nobody wanted to listen. Whoopi sensed it immediately. This wasn't going to be the soft sparring match she had planned. This was going to be war, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't come for a show. She had come for a reckoning that was 40 years in the making. The final beat of the theme music faded into absolute silence, but the tension in the room only grew louder and more suffocating. Then came the opening shot, delivered soft in tone but razored in intent. Whoopi leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her target across the table. "So, you think your version of America is the right one?" The words sounded casual enough for daytime television, but the blade was hidden between every syllable. This wasn't curiosity or genuine interest. This was a calculated challenge laced with the clear insinuation that Jasmine's perspective was naive, unproven, or worse, dangerous to the established order. The studio audience gave a low, uncertain laugh, unsure whether they were supposed to be amused or concerned by what they were witnessing. But Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't reach for her microphone or shift uncomfortably in her seat. Instead, she simply answered with a voice that was quiet, confident, and completely unshaken. "No, ma'am. I think it's the one that was never fully heard." The response landed like a slow burn, not an explosion, but a rising fire that crept under skin and passed every filter. Her voice was carefully measured, but her eyes told a much longer, deeper story. They carried the weight of courtrooms where she had fought for breathless victims. They held the echoes of neighborhoods where sirens screamed louder than opportunity ever could. In that precise moment, Jasmine wasn't defending her worldview. She was naming the silence that had systematically erased it for decades. But Whoopi wasn't finished. She shifted her posture, not with grace, but with grit, and delivered what she intended as a knockout blow. "People like you are what's wrong with America." The words dropped like a hammer, deliberately unkind and designed to end the conversation. There was no laugh track now, no applause sign blinking desperately in the background, just a long, guttural gasp from the audience that was raw, instinctive, and completely human. This wasn't just a harsh remark made for television. This was an indictment of identity, of generational defiance, of anyone who dared to challenge the established seat of institutional voice. The camera operators knew exactly what to do. One zoomed in tight, almost trembling as it framed Jasmine's face, waiting for the crack, the break, the moment of vulnerability that would make great television. But there was no flinch, no visible break in her composure. Her expression didn't harden with anger. Instead, it clarified like steel cooled in perfectly still water. She reached for the microphone slowly, not to defend herself against the attack, but to completely dismantle the premise behind it. And then, with the calm confidence of someone who was used to being systematically underestimated, she looked directly at Whoopi and delivered the line that would change everything. "You think just because they clap here, the rest of America agrees with you?" The line didn't rise in volume. It didn't need to shout to be heard. It carried the full weight of a million unheard voices, of dinner tables where no cameras rolled, of mothers praying behind closed doors, of courtroom testimonies that never made the evening news. And the studio, for all its professional lighting and polish, suddenly felt completely exposed and vulnerable. Joy Behar's nervous laughter broke the suffocating stillness, but it didn't land as intended. Instead, it cracked, thin and uncomfortable, ricocheting across the stage like a deflection that had already failed before it left her mouth. She shifted anxiously in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs, desperately searching for stable footing in a conversation that had already slipped completely out of anyone's control. Sunny Hostin moved next, her tone overly bright and her posture unnaturally stiff. "Let's pivot to Generation Z's role in voter turnout," she said, her voice rising half a pitch too high, like a lifeguard throwing a rope into waters that were already far too deep for rescue. But the current had changed permanently. The air was too thick with tension. No one in the audience moved. They didn't applaud. They didn't laugh on cue. They simply froze, unsure of what they were witnessing. Jasmine sat completely unmoved by the chaos swirling around her. Her stillness spoke louder than any possible rebuttal could have. When she finally spoke again, her voice didn't need volume because it already had something far more powerful: absolute authority. "You've been given decades to talk, Whoopi. Now it's my turn. And this time, America's watching." She didn't spit the words or deliver them with anger. She stated them as calmly as a verdict being read in court. Her eyes never left Whoopi's, not for a single second. The sentence wasn't crafted for applause or social media clips. It was too raw, too clean, too honest for that kind of performance. She wasn't demanding space at the table. She was claiming it after generations of being told to wait until the room felt more comfortable with her presence. She didn't raise her voice because she understood something that escaped everyone else in that room. The calm in her delivery carried more devastating weight than anger ever could. My father worked night security shifts in South Dallas, Jasmine said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the studio atmosphere like glass through perfect silence. He came home with bruises that no one ever bothered to ask about, just clocked out, limped through our front door, and made sure we had food on the table. Her eyes didn't waver from their target, but her words sank deep into the room, dragging everyone down with them into an uncomfortable reality. My mother was a medical aide. She would whisper prayers in our hallway during blackouts, hoping our refrigerator wouldn't spoil and our school books wouldn't get ruined by mold. Jasmine paused, not for dramatic effect, but to let the truth breathe in a space that rarely made room for it. We didn't have gated communities or private parks. We didn't have clean, safe streets. We didn't have peace and quiet. She turned her head slightly toward the camera and delivered the line that would be replayed a million times. We didn't have protected playgrounds. We lived in the storm. But just as the room began to absorb the full weight of her reality, Whoopi crossed her arms tighter and responded with calculated dismissal. Everyone struggles. The sentence fell like a door slamming shut, a quiet attempt to neutralize a truth that was far too sharp and uncomfortable to face directly. But Jasmine didn't pull back or soften her approach. She leaned into the moment, her voice quiet but deadly quiet, and said exactly what needed to be said. No, ma'am. Everyone doesn't get silenced after they survive it. That's when the fundamental shift happened. Not just on the set, but in the very air itself. The studio lights didn't flicker, but somehow they felt colder. Jasmine's words didn't echo through the space, but they rang louder than anything that had been said that entire hour. She had taken the age-old excuse of everyone struggles and stripped it completely bare, exposing it for exactly what it was. A shield designed to protect people who never had to fight for their right to speak after the fighting was supposedly over. Then, with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they had come for, she reached into her blazer. Her fingers moved with the disciplined efficiency of evidence being entered into public record. She unfolded a piece of paper, not dramatically, but with exact purpose, and held it high enough for the camera to catch every detail. Last season, you cut this, she said, holding up the documented proof. A Latina mother who spoke out against lockdown policies. You didn't just disagree with her perspective. You deleted her completely. She didn't raise the volume of her voice. Instead, she raised the stakes of the entire conversation. The paper, crisp and thoroughly annotated, showed a complete segment rundown with the woman's name, the segment title, and next to it, written in bold red marker, one word, pulled. You want to talk about silencing voices? Start with the ones you buried when they didn't fit your political narrative. As if responding to divine timing, the screen behind them flickered to life without authorization. A clip began playing as the studio monitors pushed forward a moment that no producer had approved. It showed the Latina mother speaking firmly, raw emotion visible on her face as she said, "We lost everything during the closures. My son." And then, just like before, the feed cut mid-sentence. Erased again, but this time not in secret. A panicked voice erupted from the control room. "Cut the feed now!" But the damage was already done. The clip had aired live, and Jasmine Crockett had just turned silence into undeniable proof. The silence after Jasmine's words wasn't just uncomfortable. It was historical. A vacuum so sharp, so loud in its absolute stillness, that it demanded the world fill it with something meaningful. And within seconds, it did exactly that. Twitter didn't wait for a commercial break. The platform surged like floodwater breaking through a dam that had held for decades. Screenshots flew across the internet first. Jasmine's face locked in perfect defiance. Whoopi mid-blink with her mouth half open and completely wordless. Then came the quotes, typed and retyped, shared and reshared. You were a voice. Now you're a filter, pinned, clipped, and highlighted in bold red text. Within 2 minutes, the phrase was trending. By minute 3, it had become the #1 topic under the View's official hashtag. By minute 5, newsrooms across the country were frantically screen recording the exchange. And by minute 7, the moment had completely broken containment, spreading beyond social media into mainstream consciousness. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People weren't just watching a confrontation between two women. They were witnessing the exact moment when institutional power met authentic voice, and authenticity refused to blink first. On TikTok, the viral wave moved even faster than Twitter's lightning speed. Content creators immediately began looping Jasmine's most powerful phrases over black and white footage of historical marches and protest signs. Others layered her words over slow zoom-ins of Whoopi's stunned reaction, adding text overlays like, "When truth doesn't flinch," and "This is what backbone looks like." The algorithm didn't just embrace the moment, it exploded with it, pushing the content to millions of feeds within hours. Jasmine's words weren't just being heard across the internet. They were being permanently etched into digital stone, becoming part of a new cultural vocabulary. Inside the studio, the temperature hadn't physically changed, but the atmosphere felt noticeably colder. The lights continued burning with the same intensity, but they no longer seemed to warm the stage. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the air conditioning vents seemed to fall silent, as if the room itself was afraid to interrupt what was happening. Finally, Joy Behar shifted uncomfortably in her seat, forced a smile with the stiffness of someone walking across a floor they knew was cracking beneath their feet, and interjected with a tone that was meant to lighten the mood, but was clearly layered with desperation. "Let's keep this civil," she said, offering the words like a peace treaty. But it was already far too late for diplomacy. Jasmine didn't even glance in her direction. Her gaze remained laser-focused on the same target it had held for the last 30 seconds. And when her voice came, it was quiet but carved from pure iron. Civility is what people beg for after they've already silenced the other side. The words landed with more devastating force than anything shouted that day. They weren't spoken to spark conflict or create viral content. They were spoken to expose the unwritten rules of engagement. Who gets to speak, when they're allowed to do it, and who gets immediately scolded the moment they break silence with uncomfortable truth. Whoopi sat in the aftermath, no longer attempting to respond. Not because she lacked the ability or experience, but because nothing she could say would shrink what had just been named and exposed. That moment, that phrase from her past, now echoed in millions of living rooms across America, being reinterpreted not by media pundits or political strategists, but by survivors who had waited far too long for someone to speak the way Jasmine just had. There was no applause, no desperate attempt to pivot to lighter topics, no studio laughter to cushion the fall. Jasmine had fundamentally changed the temperature of not just the room, but the entire national conversation. And everyone watching knew it. She didn't need to say anything more because in just a few precisely chosen lines, she hadn't just pulled buried history into the harsh light. She had forced the entire room to sit in it and confront what they saw. There are moments in history when power doesn't shift with dramatic explosions, but with whispers that refuse to fade into comfortable silence. Jasmine Crockett didn't storm any gates that day. She didn't throw punches or raise her voice above the carefully controlled chaos. She simply stood firm against legacy, against institutional expectation, against a system that had been polished for decades to reflect only those it had already chosen and approved. And in that absolute stillness, in her complete refusal to shrink or sweeten her truth for mass consumption, she exposed something much deeper and more troubling. That injustice doesn't always announce itself with roars and violence. Sometimes it curates. Sometimes it smiles warmly while systematically silencing. And the hardest fight isn't against obvious hate. It's against tradition that has disguised itself as progress, against gatekeepers who mistake their platforms for moral authority. Jasmine reminded America that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's standing anyway, speaking anyway, refusing to apologize for taking up space you've earned through survival. Thank you for watching this moment of truth unfold. If the story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Leave a comment below and tell us what struck you most about Jasmine's courage. Together, our voices make the difference.